The number on John's screen crossed $1 million for the first time in his life, and his wife's response was to ask if he'd remembered to move the chicken from the freezer. 30 years. 30 years of saving for this one exact moment, and it arrived indistinguishable from every other Tuesday. That was the whole party. No fireworks, no champagne, no black cards sliding across marble. Just two people in their 50s in a kitchen with laminate countertops, one of them now technically a millionaire, both of them thinking about dinner. My name is Nick, and I've spent way too much time studying the exact moment people cross this line, because almost nobody tells you the truth about what's on the other side of it. So here's the question running underneath this entire video. If John is a millionaire now, why does nothing about his life feel like that word is supposed to feel? Leave a like and let's get into it. Here's the thing about that word. Millionaire, for about 100 years, it was the finish line. It was the yacht, the private island, the guy lighting a cigar with $100 bill. Your grandparents heard millionaire and pictured a completely different species of human being. And that image is still burned into all of our brains, which is exactly the problem, because the number stopped meaning what the picture means a long, long time ago. Let me show you some math that might ruin the fantasy a little. $1 today does not buy what $1 bought a couple of decades ago. Nobody's shocked by that. But run the actual numbers and it gets uncomfortable fast. $1 million today in 2026 buys roughly what $514,000 bought in the year 2000. Go back to 1980, and today's million has the purchasing power of about $246,000 back then. So when your uncle talks about millionaires like they're royalty, he's remembering a word from a time when $1 million could buy 4 of what it buys now. The word didn't change. The math underneath it quietly did. And the culture already knows this, even if it won't say it out loud. Because here's a number that should stop you cold. When you actually survey Americans and ask them how much money it takes to be considered wealthy, the answer they give is not $1 million. It's $2.3 million. $2.3 million. That's the current going rate on the fantasy, and it's more than double the number John just hit. The finish line your grandparents worshipped is now, according to the people living today, less than half of what it takes to feel rich. John crossed a line that the culture moved decades ago and forgot to tell him about. He won a race, and somebody quietly relocated the trophy. So, what does $1 million actually do for you? Not what does it feel like. What does it functionally, mechanically do? Because this is where people get genuinely surprised. The classic rule of thumb for turning a pile of money into income is something called the 4% rule. You take 4% of your portfolio in the first year of retirement, adjust it for inflation each year after, and historically that gives you a very good chance of not running out of money over a 30-year retirement. 4% of $1 million is $40,000 a year. $40,000. That's the income $1 million produces. That's it. Now, the guy who invented that rule actually revised it recently and said you can probably push it closer to 4.7%, which gets John up to about $47,000 a year. And other researchers looking at today's expensive market think the safe number might be lower, closer to 37,000. But let's just be generous and sit in the middle. John's $1 million, the number he chased for 30 years, throws off something in the neighborhood of a normal, unremarkable American salary. He is a millionaire who, if he stops working, gets to live on roughly what a mid-career manager makes. Nobody puts that on a vision board, and I want you to actually sit in what that feels like, because 40-something thousand a year is a real budget with real edges. It's still checking the total on the screen at the grocery store before you tap the card. It's still deciding the trip to see the grandkids happens once this year instead of twice, because flights got expensive and the math is the math. Being a millionaire in this scenario does not mean the price of things stops mattering. It means you cleared the finish line and discovered the finish line has a mortgage payment. The anxiety doesn't vanish, it just changes shape from will I ever have enough to please, God don't let me lose what I built, and it gets more brutal. Because that income isn't landing in a vacuum. It's landing in a body that is aging. One of the single largest expenses waiting for John and Kara isn't a boat, it's healthcare. The current estimate for what a 65-year-old couple retiring today will spend on healthcare over the rest of their lives, and this does not even include long-term care, is about $345,000. So a big, ugly chunk of that hard-won million has already been spoken for by a future version of John who has knee problems and takes 4 medications. The million was never fully his, it came with a bill attached. Okay, but the income problem isn't even the strangest part. Here's the part that genuinely breaks people's brains when they finally see it. Being a millionaire on paper and having $1 million to spend are two completely different universes. Let me explain what I mean, because this is the trap almost nobody warns you about. When we say John has $1 million net worth, we're adding up everything he owns and subtracting what he owes. And for a typical American who reaches this milestone, most of that net worth is sitting in 2 places: the equity in the house he lives in and the retirement accounts he legally cannot fully touch yet. Think about what that actually means. You can't spend your house. I mean, you can sell it, but then you have to live somewhere, and that somewhere also costs money. And the money in a traditional retirement account isn't just sitting there like cash in a drawer. If John tries to yank it out before he's 59 and a half, he gets hit with penalties and taxes that take a machete to the balance. So here's this man who is, on paper, a millionaire, and if his water heater explodes next Tuesday, he might genuinely have to think hard about whether he can cover it. That's not a contradiction. That's the completely normal, standard issue reality of what this milestone looks like. You want to see how deep this goes? Look at the numbers for the whole country. The median American household net worth, when you include home equity, is around $193,000. Strip out the equity in the home, just the roof over their heads, and that median net worth collapses to something like $58,000. Most of what Americans have is a house they're living inside of and can't eat. So when John looks at his $1 million number and then looks at his actual bank account and feels a confusing gap between the two, he's not crazy. The number is real. It's just mostly locked in a vault he doesn't have the keys to yet. It's like being told you own a gold mine, and also you're not allowed inside the mine. And when he finally does get inside, someone's waiting for him. Because here's the next thing nobody puts in the Millionaire brochure. That retirement account, the big beautiful one with the 7-figure balance, has a silent business partner who's been on the account the entire time: the government. If John's million is sitting in a traditional pre-tax retirement account, that is not $1 million. That is $1 million minus every bit of income tax he never paid on the way in. When he pulls that money out in retirement, it gets taxed as ordinary income, federal and often state. Depending on where he lives and how he takes it, that $1 million balance might really be worth somewhere around $700,000 in actual spendable in his pocket dollars. And the government isn't a patient partner. Either this is a business partner who never showed up to a single meeting, never put in a dollar, never once asked how John's day was going, and then strolls in at the end demanding a cut of everything. And once John turns 73, this partner stops letting him decide when to take the money out at all. There's a rule called the required minimum distribution, and it forces him to withdraw a chunk every single year whether he wants to or not, specifically so they can finally tax it. In that first year on a $1 million balance, that forced withdrawal is roughly $37,700, dragged out into the daylight and taxed, ready or not. John spent decades thinking of that account as his. It was always quietly a little bit theirs too. The statement said 1 million, the fine print said 1 million, terms and conditions apply. So at this point, you might be picturing the person who reaches this milestone as some flashy high roller who gamed the system. And this is where I have to completely rearrange the picture, because the real millionaire looks nothing like the commercial. When researchers actually study thousands of people with $1 million net worth, the profile that comes back is almost aggressively boring. The most common careers aren't hedge fund manager or crypto founder. They're engineer, accountant, teacher, manager, regular jobs. The vast majority never inherited a meaningful amount of money. Most of them never even earned a six-figure salary in a typical year. They just did an incredibly unsexy thing for an incredibly long time. They saved a chunk of every paycheck, they put it into boring index funds, and then they waited about 26 years. That's John, high school chemistry teacher for 3 decades. Care as an engineer, they drove Camrys until the Camrys died of old age, and then they bought slightly newer used Camrys. They are, by every visible measure, the most middle-class looking people on their street. And then there's Todd, 2 doors down. Todd has the leased German SUV, the boat he uses twice a year, the watch that costs more than John's first car, and the kind of lawn that requires a guy. Todd looks about 10 times richer than John. Todd is also, and I cannot stress this enough, probably one slow month at work away from the whole thing coming down like a Jenga tower in a mild breeze. Because here's the thing the research keeps confirming: the people who look rich and the people who are rich are very often not the same people. Wealth is quiet. It's the stuff you don't see. It's the car that isn't in the driveway, the vacation that didn't get posted, the watch nobody's wearing. And getting there is brutal, specifically at the start, which is the part that makes people quit. There's this famous line from the investor Charlie Munger, who said the first $100,000 is well, let's say it's a nightmare, but you have to get through it. And he's right, and the math is right. At the beginning, your money grows almost entirely because you keep shoving money into it, not because it's earning anything meaningful on its own. It feels like pushing a boulder up a hill with your bare hands, but once the pile gets big enough, the growth on the pile starts to outrun what you're adding, and the boulder starts rolling on its own. Most people never get to feel that because they quit while they're still pushing. John didn't quit. That's the entire secret. It's almost insulting how simple it is. But here's a wrinkle: because a lot of people don't just quit, they actively sabotage the thing. The uncomfortable truth from decades of investor data is that the average person earns dramatically less than the funds they're invested in, and not because the funds did badly. It's because people panic sell at the bottom, pile in at the top, and tinker constantly. Over a long stretch, the average investor has ended up with less than half of what they'd have had if they'd just bought a boring index fund and never touched it again. John's superpower wasn't picking winners, it was doing absolutely nothing for 30 years on purpose. He got rich by being the most patient, least interesting man at the party. And I know some of you are getting a little annoyed right now. You're thinking, come on, Nick, quit being dramatic. $1 million is still $1 million. Most people never get close. And you're right. You're completely right, and I don't want to lose that. $1 million net worth still puts John in roughly the top 10 to 15% of American households. It is a genuine achievement that the overwhelming majority of people never reach. But here's the part that reframes the whole thing: to crack the actual top 1%, the level people are picturing when they daydream about rich, John would need to grow his money more than 10 times over. The distance from broke to millionaire is enormous. The distance from millionaire to actually rich is a canyon most millionaires never cross. He's not at the top of the mountain, he's at a very nice rest stop with a good view, catching his breath, and there's one more quiet disappointment tucked inside that number, especially for anyone hoping to pass something on. $1 million, for most people who reach it, is not generational wealth. It's barely one generational wealth. Run the tape forward, subtract the taxes, subtract the six-figure healthcare bill, subtract 30 years of a couple actually living off the thing. What's left at the end is usually not a dynasty. It's a paid-off house and whatever didn't get spent. That's a real gift, I'm not knocking it. But the fantasy where you hit $1 million and your grandkids are set for life forever was never $1 million fantasy. That number starts a couple of zeros further down the road, which is an uncomfortable thing to learn after you've already run the entire race. And this is where it gets almost sad, because even standing at that nice rest stop, the people who make it mostly don't feel any of it. When you survey actual millionaires and ask them if they consider themselves wealthy, the overwhelming majority say no. Only around 8% of people with $1 million in investable assets will call themselves wealthy. Most of them say they're middle class or upper middle class. Let that sink in. The thing you're chasing, the number, the milestone, the finish line, the people who have already crossed it are standing there telling you it doesn't feel like crossing anything. Why? Why doesn't it land? Part of it is what we already covered, that the money is locked up and taxed and inflated away, but part of it is just how the human brain works, and this is the trap that gets absolutely everyone. Your sense of enough is not a fixed point. It moves. The second you hit a number, that number becomes your new normal, your new baseline, the new floor you're standing on, and your eyes drift up to the next number. When John made 40,000 a year, 100,000 looked like freedom. When he made 100, he started noticing the people making 250. There is no amount of money where the brain finally exhales and says, "Great. We're done, we can relax now." The goalpost isn't at the end of the field. The goalpost is attached to your own forehead, and it moves every time you do. And I want to be clear, this is not a video about rich people. Because that treadmill, you're already on it. If you make 40,000 right now, some version of you is certain that 70 would fix everything. If you make 70, you're eyeing the people at 120. The millionaire staring at his balance, feeling vaguely unsatisfied, is not a different creature from you. He is you, further up the same treadmill, discovering that the belt keeps speeding up no matter how far he runs. John isn't chasing a number anymore. He's been quietly conscripted into chasing the feeling the number was supposed to give him, and that feeling turns out to be permanently sold out, which, honestly, is the whole reason I started building the thing I run now. Because if the number can't give you the feeling, the next best move is to stop white-knuckling a single paycheck and actually understand the machine underneath all of this. That's why I put together a school community where I walk people through, step by step, how I build faceless YouTube channels like this one into real income in an economy that feels rigged against just saving your way out. No hype, no guru posing in front of a rented Lamborghini, just the actual playbook. Links in the description if you want in, and we'd be glad to have you. Anyway, back to John. Because here's where I want to leave you, and it's not where you think. None of this means the milestone is worthless. John and Kara are genuinely fine. They have a paid-off house, an income for life, and they will never, ever lie awake doing the terrifying kind of math. That's not nothing. That's actually enormous. The mistake was never in reaching the million. The mistake is in what we were told the million would feel like. We were sold a fireworks show and handed a quiet kind of freedom instead, and because we were watching the sky for explosions, most of us don't even notice the freedom when it finally shows up. So a couple of weeks after the number crossed 1 million, John was standing in his driveway on a Saturday watching Kara back the 10-year-old Camry out to go get groceries. Same car, same cracked concrete he keeps meaning to fix. And 2 doors down, Todd was loading the boat onto the trailer again, phone wedged against his shoulder, arguing with somebody about a payment. John watched them both for a second. Todd, who looked like the millionaire, John, who actually was one. And that was the moment it finally hit him, not at the laptop, not at the number, but right there watching a used sedan pull out of a paid-off driveway while his neighbor wrestled a boat he couldn't afford. The thing John had spent 30 years chasing had already arrived. It just showed up so quietly he almost missed it, because it never once looked like the commercial. It looked like this. It looked like nothing. And nothing, it turns out, is a lot more than most people ever get. If any of this shifted how you think about the number you're chasing, that community link is waiting for you down below. And quick reminder, I'm not a financial advisor. This is for educational purposes only, and what you do with your own money is on you. I'll see you in the next one.